Thank you for the feedback. I'm trying to get this better. Bingo. Perfect. I don't know what I did, but thank you very much. All right, so one of the things that I've never really been a big fan of bringing this light all the way back here. By having the light back here, again, it does light up everything better top to bottom. But the downside is it also lights up the entire background. And so it makes the image a little bit more flat or flatter. So keep an eye on the brightness of this background here. If I were to move this here, lower the light power down, and then take an additional step and feather it so that way it's more in front of her. Now instantaneously you have an image that I think has a lot more pop. Now yes, it makes the legs a lot darker, but that's where I'll show you a fix for that. But you're going to get a softer light on the body, and then if you notice, there's a lot more shadow as opposed to having the light all the way back here. Now there's still shadow, but it's a lot softer of a shadow, so it's not going to be as contrasty. And with fitness, it's all about having as much contrast as possible. You wanna add a lot more shadows with fitness as opposed to the opposite. So this is probably one of my most the biggest suggestion I'd have when shooting fitness. And keep in mind, this is for fitness specifically. It's not for senior pictures or portraits, because if you don't have a lot of muscle definition, then it's really not the most ideal light setup. But if you have your key, camera left, then I would have an edge light, camera right. And so another piece to factor in is what lens you're using. Let's change this. One of my favorite lenses to use with fitness is going to be a 50mm. Allows you to do full body, but then also allows you to do 3/4 quite nicely. Allows you to be closer to the subject, so that way you create more of a connection, with posing, there's a lot of different strategies with posing. With fitness, most people that are in fitness, most of the clients that you get with fitness, they're not models. They're people that are doing a fitness competition to show off their definition and their hard work. And then when they do a shoot, it's not because they want to be models, it's because they want to showcase all that hard work. So most of the clients are not going to have a lot of skill when it comes to posing themselves. So one of the things that makes you most monetizable is being able to tell them, do this, do that, do this, do that. So being close to them is going to allow them to hear you a little bit easier. The thing about using a 50mm is you have to be careful where your lights are placed, because here, this light is fairly close to her, and you want to make sure that you, as much as possible, position the lights where they're not going to be in your frame, so you don't have to edit them out. This is a pretty basic 2-light setup. Simon Morton, what's going on, Simon? For those of you who don't know Simon Morton, he's based out of the UK. He is a incredibly talented creative, and he shoots a lot of selfies of him in bathtubs. That's really what he does. Yeah. I'll let you discover that yourselves. Simon Morton, based out of the UK, incredible photographer. And in fact, there's a lot of amazing photographers on this cast right now. You have NNC Visuals. He's going to be doing a podcast I'm doing a podcast with him. He started podcasting sometime last year. And he's gotten me kind of hooked on doing podcasting as well. All right, so you have a 2-light setup here. Things to keep in mind: you want to make sure that the model is posing based on where the light is. So if you have her face looking at the camera here with that light set up, then the lighting's going to be kind of crappy on her face. And so you want to make sure that you model or you light for the face. The tricky thing about fitness is if you're trying to light for the body, for the physique, you really have to control the model's pose, because if they're trying to always make eye contact, sometimes the light that best showcases their physique is not necessarily the best light that showcases their face. So you want to be aware of that. So if you had this model rotate more to you, then what I'd probably do is still have the model turn their face towards the light there. So that way the body looks good and then the face looks good as well. And of course, you can always move this way. But the more you get towards that main light here, and of course, you'd have to move this light over to the side as well. The more you get to this side where the key light is more towards you, then you're slowly going to degrade some of the shadows, which makes it so it's not going to be as powerful when it comes to fitness. So posing based on where the light is going to be super key. Let's bring this light back in here. So this is a super basic 2-light setup. Now another variation can be sandwich, and that's where you bring this light onto the other side of the body, on the opposite side of the key light. So the key light's camera left, then you put that light to the right. And so the model would basically be the meat of the sandwich, the lights of the bread. In this scenario, the nice thing is you still have highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow. And so it's going to be great for definition, but it's not going to be as dramatic. When would you want to use this setup? Either if someone does not have a lot of muscle tone, or if someone has a ton of muscle tone. If they have a ton, then you actually do want to have lights to showcase all the muscles, because then they'll showcase all of the striations on the camera right quad. Because without this light, everything here is going to be dark. So if they are the most shredded person you've ever shot, all of those muscles are hidden by shadows. So that's when you might want to have a light on this side. So that way you have the shadow, highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow, highlight. So that'd be the ideal situation. Well, the ideal situation is for you to have a lot of lights. Again, I recommend everybody have at least 3 if you're going to shoot fitness. 3 at the bare minimum, 5 or 6 is better. So let's put this back into the rim position. So if this is a 2-light setup, say you're able to get a 3rd light, then this light has a couple different potential spots. If it's here, then you're going to have an additional rim. So take a notice of the quad here. So that's going to add a little bit of punch to the quads. So this is a pretty standard 3-light setup. A 3-light setup is pretty standard. So that's 3-light setup that I'd use for fitness. This is a 3-light setup I would use for portraits. For portraits, this is pretty standard. Either the key on the camera left side, or you can put the key on the camera right side. So for portraits, and then you can even put the light directly behind the camera too. So this is a fairly easy light setup to do. So if you're just starting out with photography, 3 lights, super basic. Camera right to the long side of the face is pretty standard, or to the left. More on the short side is pretty standard as well. Short side is actually if you bring the light over here. So for fitness specifically, you want to increase the amount of shadows intentionally into the picture. Let's add more lights. So let's say I had a, let's see, anything softbox for indoor, everything softbox. For indoors, I like using a lot of softboxes. And the reason why is because if you're outdoors, you don't necessarily want a lot of softboxes because the wind can knock something over. And I'm sure we've all had stories of gear falling over. If you're indoors, you don't have the fear of wind. And because you're indoors, I'm a control freak. I like having full control of what the lighting does. So that's why I like having a lot of modifiers indoors. If you have the budget, this is where I start adding additional lights. So the nice thing about this is an easy way to increase. If you look here, let's bring this camera down so you can see a little more. By adding or stacking lights here, what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that your edge light goes from the very bottom all the way to the very, very top. This to me is what you call sexy light. I'll put this light actually right on the floor. And then I'll take this light and go right above. So having it's a quad edge light system, quad rim. Let's turn this key off so you can see. So with the quad edge light, you have lights all the way to the top, all the way down to the very bottom. And then from here, you just add on additional lights. All right, so let's add one over here. And to answer any questions, is this a light setup that I actually do use? Yes. When it comes to fitness, the more lights you have, the more impact or the more dynamic image you can create. And so I'm a huge fan of using as many lights as you possibly can when it comes to fitness. And one rule or one thing to always keep in mind when you're using fitness or when you're using lighting with fitness, every single light has a very, very specific purpose. That's why I like having the lights really super close to the model. Every light is intentionally placed for a very, very specific purpose. In this case, this floor light here is mainly for the quad here. So if you turn it on or off, it's going to hit the bottom part of the abs. So if this model had a six-pack, it would hit the bottom part. And then it also hits the quad here. And then here's a little lighting hack. If you take this light, say you don't have a ton of lights, but you want to add in a tiny bit. Let's turn these off so you can see what this does. So with this light here, if you see, there's a little bit of specular highlight on the camera right side by the obliques, by the quads. You want to turn this power up a tiny bit. So this light is not used to light up the body. And this light would have 0 modifiers on it other than just the cone. But this is going to give you an additional specular highlight. And if the model were to look at the camera, it would also give a specular, or it would give a catch light in the eyes as well. So now let's add these lights back in. So you can see here, this light is specifically for the quads. Take a look at that light and without. So this one definitely adds in the highlights on the body here. And then if you take the key light, so it's going to hit everything on this side. Edge hits the upper part of the shoulder. Edge hits the bottom part of the quads. Camera left side of the quads. Camera left, shoulder, and then I would add one additional light as well. I know it sounds like there's a ton of lights. Nice thing is if you're using 200s, you can use all 200s. I mean, you could have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You could have an 8 light setup using just 200s. 200s are fairly cheap. You can get 8 200s for the same cost as a 1 strobe. If you get, one pro photo is going to be, if you get the B10 plus, that light's going to be, $2,400. So for the cost of 1 pro photo, you can get 8 lights that you'd be able to do a ton of amazing things with. Big thing here is I feather as much as I can so that way it doesn't hit the background. And even on this light, I'd feather a little bit more. So this light here, you're just adding another layer of highlights onto the quads. Seems like overkill, and it is. This is going to be ideal if you have someone that is just ridiculously shredded. Someone that is fresh off of the stage, someone that has insane muscle detail. Tons of definition, tons of muscles, tons of muscle bumps. This light setup is going to look like crap if you have someone that's skinny, fat, like or just chunky like me. If you have someone that does not have the right physique for it, this light setup is ridiculous. So if you have a average person, this light setup is more than enough. And what I would actually do, well, yeah. So let's talk about the placement here. Why I'd have one light up high and one light down low. If you have your key light up high, up here, then I would probably want this light to be down low because you have a highlight coming from this. Let's turn this one off. If you have a 2-light setup, if you have your key up high hitting the upper body, then I'd want to have some light on the bottom right to balance out the tones. What I don't want, or what I want to make sure of, is that your settings are accurate, because I do see this quite a bit as well. I'll see the key light set like this, but then the edge light either too far out to the side, which makes your edge too fat, or I see it too bright, where there's a humongous hot spot. And what you don't want is you don't want tons of whites, because if there's tons of white, that means that you have lost detail. You want to preserve as much detail as possible. And again, you want to get this light in as close as you can. And in fact, if I'm in a studio environment, I would even possibly have this light to where you could see the light in the shot, so I can get this as razor thin as possible, knowing that I can Photoshop this out in post. Now, with that said, I would probably do that instead, just because I don't want to have to Photoshop. But then just turning down the power here, making sure that you have as thin of an edge as possible, and you don't, while making sure that the power is not overly done. And then adding this light here is going to give you a little bit more separation. The word of the day is separation. You want to separate, the dark parts away, or you want it to pop from the background. And then second point is to make sure that your key light does not aim straight at the background, because if this is aimed more towards her, and if you bring this more towards the front, then now you're changing the overall aesthetic. By brightening up the background, now you're losing a little bit of punch. So rotate a little bit more, make sure you light for the face, feather as much as possible. Nice amount of feathering as well. Feathering is going to allow you to light more top to bottom with the softer part of the light. If you notice here, this is center of the light, but the center of the light is not aimed at the model. Instead, now I'm lighting using this part. And these are things that you'll actually see me do in a lot of my shoots. That is lighting 101-ish. Any questions? I know that's a lot of talking. Any question? Let's see. I have up to 4 honey badgers with salt boxes. I think I might get a few strip boxes and a beauty ring. Honey badgers. I have honey badgers. Sounds like 2 mics are on. Yeah. Eric, everything else. Appreciate the comments. If you don't have any other questions, I want to log out so I can still try to figure out how to make this live stream go by a little bit better. I'm going to try to do streams a few times a week. I'm going to start covering, do you ever use bare bulbs, reflectors? Outside, so do you ever use bare bulbs? Yes, I use bare bulbs if I'm outdoors. I use bare bulbs if I know, or I'll use bare bulbs if I want to create that star effect. If you have a bare bulb, and I don't know if I can simulate this here. Kind of like that. You see how that creates like a little bit of a star? I think there's a term for that. I just don't know what it is. But notice how you have this. So there are going to be times when that's actually an aesthetic choice that you'd make. I've done that with MMA shoots in the past, where you get that star effect, lens flare. Yeah. Indoors, like in a big space, like I did that, not intentionally, but that's what I I used when I did my last MMA shoot, and so you had some of that starring or the lens flare in the back. Outdoors, when I go to Vegas, I shoot at the dry lake bed quite a bit, and so I will use bare bulb at the dry lake bed mainly because I don't want the wind to blow over my lights. And so it's not because of an aesthetic reason. It's simply because I don't want the wind to blow over a softbox. And even in that case, if I'm shooting outdoors, a lot of times I'll shoot like this. I'll have the camera right next to this key light because I'll have my legs wrapped around the light stand if I don't have a sandbag or if I don't have a C-stand. So a lot of times the lighting choices, it's based on your environment and based on who you have to help. If I have someone that will hold the light or make sure that the wind doesn't, knock it over, then this is the preferred light setup that I'll use. But again, I want to try to protect my gear as much as possible. Let's see. Use bare bulbs and reflectors. I use the reflected cones. I've got that Profoto B10s, and so they have the built-in recessed cone, I guess. Kind of similar to the Godox 600, how it has the recessed cone. I don't use the reflectors, so if you're talking about, I don't know if it has. So if you're talking about one of these reflectors here, or a scrim or something like that, I don't use reflectors at all. They would be super beneficial, super helpful, but I don't use them mainly because, I don't have a reason. Whenever I tried using a gold one outdoors, like I've tried to use these, but when you're doing natural light, when the sun hits or reflects this off into their face, like that right there, most of the time it makes the model squint really bad. These are amazing because it does cast, like if you look at the highlights, it casts a nice glow onto the skin. I don't know. If it's windy outside, it makes it hard for people to hold on to it, and I'd rather have them hold on to a strobe. Let's see. Does the size matter for the softbox? Circular and rectangular. Great question. The size, I use a 36 inch. I use a 36 for a couple different reasons. One, the bigger light source you have, the softer light you're going to have. I travel quite a bit, so the reason why I have a 36 is because it fits into my travel case. Anything beyond that, it makes it harder to travel with. And so I like to, and the bigger you go, I do a lot of shoots outdoors. The bigger you go, then the more the wind's going to catch it as well. So that's something that you want to factor in. I don't like traveling with humongous amounts of gear. The more you take, the more stuff can break. So 36 inches is ideal. The main difference between the octo and the square or rectangle, I haven't seen a big difference. The main difference is just the catch light in the eyes. I'm sure there's more than that, in terms of what the main differences are. But for me, it's just the catch light. That's the difference. So it doesn't really matter for me. What usual power the light should be on? Recommendations for the power. If I'm indoors, depends on what color the background is. If you want to try to darken the background, if there's ambient light, if you're shooting daytime and you want to make it more moody, I don't have a set power level. If you're shooting outdoors, I'll start off at half power and go up to full power as needed. If I want to darken the background, if I want to try to make the sky more saturated, then of course I've got to have the power higher. If I'm in the studio, it kind of depends on what the ambient lighting situation is. What program? This is 3D Set a Light. Can you get harder corners and harsher shadows with bare bulbs versus softbox? Harder corners and harsher shadows. Yeah, bare bulbs can give you more of a crisp shadow if you're looking like for the background. I don't like hard shadows on the skin if you're doing fitness. Like for example, if you're doing hard bulb on this, let's change the power. So using a hard light on the face here, Hard light's going to give you, well, if you pull this light back, there's going to be a difference in this little shadow here. I'm not a big fan of the harsher shadows with fitness, at least on this side. If you look at the shadow underneath the jaw as compared to using a bigger light source, there's going to be a difference in this right here. We said, would it be best to use a silver umbrella over a shoot through due to shadows? Would the shadows be too harsh for the key light? A silver umbrella over a shoot through due to the shadows. See, when you start getting to technical questions like that, Kyle, that's when my brain shuts off. I don't have the technical answers for you. I've never used, I have one umbrella that I use. I want to say it is, I think it's like a 55 inch. I do enjoy using it, but I don't have the complex answers for your question. I don't travel with it, and I use it on occasion, only when I need a softer light. When doing full body shots, how to reduce shadow from the shooting on a white backdrop. When doing full body shoot, how to reduce shadow from the shooting on a white back. Habib, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. All right, guys. Well, that is going to be it for today. Thank you for joining. I'm going to try to do these chats, like I said, a few times a week. I'm going to try to use this platform to reach a bigger audience. So if you saw value in this, please share with your friends. I'm going to cover quite a few different things on these live streams. Lighting like this. If you have any questions with any specific shots, send me a message on Instagram. Instagram is at Seeley Photo with the F, SeeleyPhoto. Send me a message over there. If you have any questions on images, we can do image critiques over here as well. Talking about business. We're gonna do a lot more stuff this year. Starting a podcast. Again, I don't know if he's still on here, but starting a podcast with NNC Visuals. We're going to be talking a lot about business, a lot of interesting things. Not so much, how to do photo shoots, but more how to monetize off of photo shoots. So hopefully that is beneficial. And for the regulars that I've seen quite a few people that have popped up on my attempts at live streaming. Thank you for your continued support. I appreciate you guys coming back despite all of my technical issues. So thank you for that. And if you have any questions, let us know. The last thing to say is you'll hopefully see a lot of regulars, join, because I have seen quite a few familiar names. See a lot of faces here. Biggest thing I would say is hopefully after listening to these live streams or the podcast that I do with Noland, you'll see that there's nothing wrong with sharing information. Everybody travels at their own speed. Everybody kind of sets their own pace. But at the end of the day, there's an endless amount of people that all want images and that are willing to pay for images. And so the more you share, the more you're making everybody else better, the better everybody else gets. The reality is the more that you're going to end up being able to charge later, because if the masses get better, then the expectations, the talent pool increases. And when people see talented people, there's a lot of people that are willing to pay top dollar for services. And so by sharing and helping other people get better, you're actually benefiting yourself in the long run. Because hopefully you too will be growing at the same pace, if not faster. So hopefully you guys get value. And if so, hopefully you come back. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. Click on that notification bell so you get updates every time we post new content, blah, 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 all the usual YouTubers type stuff. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you guys soon.